Hi, I am Cherie Burkett, and my um, stipend series for the year 2022/2023 was over creating quality learning opportunities for English learners. Um, I think the main topic for this stipend series was to develop some activities that would support our students while learning the content, but to support them with their language acquisition as well. My biggest takeaway from this is I'm trying to forward the slide. Sorry. My biggest takeaway from this was that the students need to be able to speak during the activity, write during the activity, read during the activity, and listen during the activity. I did lots of activities that involved them working in groups, but I think the number one thing that I did not allow them to do was speak. I don't know if that's due to classroom management. I didn't say that. I don't mean that they weren't allowed to speak at all. I mean, speaking was not part of the activity. I did a lot of card matches and some things like that. Um, but I did not incorporate the speaking, which almost always incorporates the listening. That was my biggest add-on. We used the textbook or the book that they provided us, which had some really good information in it. The three activities that I chose to do were the card sort. Again, none of these activities were new, they were adapted to include the speaking element for most of them. The domino activity, certainly I've done this many times, but I incorporated a speaking element. And then the 20 questions activity, this one, I used the sketching polynomial cards before in previous years, but what I had not done was I didn't do it the way that I did this year. So this one, the 20 questions activity was probably the biggest change for the activity, and it came out to be my favorite. Um, so this is the methods that they wanted us to be sure and incorporate. In order to fully incorporate the new language, they need to speak it and listen and read it and write it. So that was our focus, or that was my focus when I adapted my activities. The result was I don't know, maybe I'm worse than other people, but I absolutely positively hate changing things. So when they told us you don't have to create new activities, just change the one you had, I'm like, yeah, well, my activities are fine. I don't know why I need to change them. But as it turned out, it was absolutely not. It was a good outcome. So, adding the new elements to the activities had a favorable result. Something different can be the key, meaning that how do you know that something's not going to work until you try? Taking the activities that I already use, that I've already found to be successful, and then tweaking them just a little bit could make the big difference between doing the same old thing over and over and over again versus finding an activity that will really make the kids go, wow, this is hard. Not in a bad way, but in a way that demonstrates to them that maybe what they thought they know, they don't know as well. And I'll talk more about that when I get to the specific activity. Um, Having them speak to each other in ways that they can definitely both understand, I think demonstrates the necessity for a common vocabulary. And it really, really, really helped me emphasize the need for the math vocabulary. If you're talking about a curve, you need to be able to use the necessary vocabulary, because otherwise it's going to be very hard for you to get somebody to describe the curve if you don't have those words like relative minimum, relative maximum, y-intercept, x-intercept, those things like that. Um, they were finding it very difficult when they were trying to discover what they had when without the use of the vocabulary. So a lot of times I would walk around and I would listen to the conversation that was being held by the students, and I would say, I hear the words that you're saying, and I think if you'll use this word instead, that the question will come out clearer. I don't think your partner is understanding what you're trying to ask. So I would give them the vocabulary word, they would use it, and as long as they used it correctly, then I was able to walk away and they were able to finish. So excellent way to prove the necessity for vocabulary. I put don't give up here because my first activity with my first class, I'm not going to say it bombed, but I am going to say it needed a lot of adjustments. And so I was like, oh, I really had high hopes for this. And then it didn't turn out quite so well. I made a few tweaks, and by the time I did it the last time, it came out beautifully. So just because it doesn't work out the first time doesn't mean that you should give up and not give it a try. Tweak it, try to do what you can to make it better. Ask the kids what part was good, what part was bad, what would have been better if I had done what. And they were very helpful with. I didn't like that I kept having to, do this. I didn't like that I wasn't able to do that. And so they helped me tweak it for my later classes. And some of the things that I tried, I had no idea that was going to be what would work. It seemed, I'll be specific about my things in just a second, but you never know what will work. So don't be afraid to try something. This was the card sort. Like I said, I had done the card sort before. It was more, I believe it was more of, oh, I'm sorry, I've got two of them up here. I'll talk about the card sort. The card sort was definitely something that I'd done before. I didn't use the mat. And I started this activity by having them dump the cards, and the first thing they had to do was talk to each other about how they could sort the cards. Not on the mat, just sort the cards. And the cards were in two groups. They were in groups of quadratics that were set equal to 0 and quadratics that were not set equal to 0. So that was the thing that they had to have conversations about how they thought they should separate them. They would call me over, I would look at their two groups, and I would say, yes, that was the two groups I was going for, or tell me about your groups, and then we would talk about, was it really distinctive enough? And some of them had them organized in a way that was close, but it really wasn't distinctive enough to separate the two groups. So it created lots of good conversation. Once they divided them into two groups, they were then supposed to sort them into things that could factor. You could solve by factoring. You could solve by square rooting both sides. You can solve by completing the square, and you could solve by quadratics. And then after they got them sorted, then they had to get on their paper and go work them. And they were allowed to work together in groups to check each other's work and stuff. The domino activity, they have to they have on one side of each domino is the set of equations. Some of them were completely filled out. Some of them had voided or missing parts. And then on the other side of the card, there was a graph. On each card, the graph does not match the equations. So they had to go through and find the domino. Like, for example, this card F right here, these equations matched this card over here. They had to find out which one matched and then tape them together and then fill in the missing pieces. Conversations had to be taking place because I required them to talk about what the graph was giving you. What you were supposed to be looking for in the equations, and then how to figure out how you could look at this equation and figure out the parts that were missing. They had to tape them together. It was a complete loop. Once they finished, every domino matched to the other one. It was super quick and easy to grade. The kids really liked this one. And my last one was the one that created the most conversations. Again, this was an activity that I'd done before where they had to match the equations with the graphs, and there were some other cards that they matched too. I just chose to use the equations and the cards. I taped them to the back of a board here. The students holding the board was not allowed to see the card that was taped. On the front of the card, on the front of the board, they were to go around and ask one question that had a yes or no answer to try to figure out what was taped to their board. Once they figured out that they had a graph, they then had to figure out what the graph looked like. Once they figured out they had an equation, they then had to figure out what the equation looked like. And this was the paper where they recorded their questions and the answers to their questions, and help them figure out. At the very end, they had to find, if they had an equation on their board, they then had to find their matching graph. So this one was particularly fun. It lasted quite a long time. The kids found out that asking yes/no questions is very hard. A lot of them would say, is it a graph or an equation? And the student would just stand there because they could only say yes or no. I did have to teach them how to rotate. They did not rotate around each other very well. So that was one of the things that I had to adjust. We had to have, I had to have like a scheduled, okay, rotate, okay, rotate, okay, rotate, or they would just stay and talk to the same person. Excellent activities. They worked good for even those students that were not English language learners, but I appreciate that it gave the English language learners, all four of the representations that they need. I hope you find all of this information valuable.